Welcome back to the Tango Banter. I'm Yelizaveta, and before we start our discussion today, I wanted to alert you to a couple of things that are coming up in my schedule that you might be interested in. Number one is that next week's episode is going to be my interview with Scott Bodie. Some of you might be familiar with Scott because he is a tango nomad who's been traveling the world dancing tango for the past few years. He's a friend whom I met on the dance floor some time ago, and we discuss his journey from living in San Francisco and being an organizer and a teacher to then giving up all of his possessions and traveling the world, and in the end, starting an incredible new project that I think might change the way tango is done around the world. So you want to tune into that episode next week. Now, the other reminder I wanted to mention is that next month, March 27th through 30th, is the Southern California Tango Championship. And I'm going to be there. I'm actually going to be participating once again in the Jack and Jill competition as a leader. I'm super excited about that. If you're planning to go, let me know. Would love to meet you and connect. And if you're interested in learning more about it, if you've been actually thinking maybe about joining the Jack and Jill competition and what that requires, and you have some questions, please let me know. You can reach me on social media, on Instagram at I'm So Tango. I would love to connect with you and answer any questions. So today we are talking about self-criticism. This is a very common topic and question that I get from dancers about how to deal with the negative self-talk and self-criticism that we end up experiencing on the dance floor. And when I typically respond and I think about like, what are some of the biggest ahas that helped me to deal with that, it always comes back to some sort of a decision on my part to not go along with this critical part of me, not succumbing to its convincing logic around what I'm lacking. And, to do that, it's not as easy as it sounds, right? Whenever we do get into that negative mindset, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, never mind, I'll just think something else. In fact, sometimes if somebody suggests that to you, it feels even worse because we feel inadequate in some way because it's not as easy as just like turning off, flipping a switch of some kind. So it can be really frustrating for us to know what to do when we, especially at first, get into tango and maybe we're prone to being a bit of a perfectionist. I don't know if you have an issue with that, but I definitely struggle with perfectionism. I feel like there's a lot of people in tango who would admit to that. So everyone actually struggles with self-criticism and negative self-talk. I have not met any dancers who would tell me that they don't struggle with some sort of perfectionist attitude. And granted, I used to be really proud of being a perfectionist because I believed that's what it took to get really good. But eventually, the reality is that that actually is the opposite of getting good because the more you strive for perfection, the more imperfection you end up seeing in yourself. And so perfectionism is kind of like a dog chasing its own tail. It's that feeling in your mind. That's how I finally realized that perfectionist attitudes or perfectionist qualities are not necessarily something to be proud of, something that makes you somehow better or more special or that you're going to progress faster. What it does mean is that you're very susceptible to negative self-talk and challenges that have to do with just mental environment that a lot of times becomes very toxic in certain situations. So no matter how much experience you've had with negative self-talk, and if maybe some of you have developed strategies along the way, maybe your parents taught you how to deal with those kinds of thought patterns. But for most of us, we don't really know what to do when we experience those emotions. Like this message that I got from one of the dancers who said, every time that I'm dancing, I close my eyes and all I can think about, oh, the elbow needs to go here and the foot needs to go here. And this is not turned out enough. And is the leader enjoying my dance? It's like all of these questions. I used to think of it as like a Rolodex. That's what it was like in my mind. And for a long time, my dancing was very much like me just going through the Rolodex of things that I was always checking. And it became sort of a map that my mind would go down this list. And that's how I danced for a long time. And it was kind of exhausting. And I maybe got better over time just by virtue of doing it a lot. But it's not like I felt better about my dance. If anything, I continued to feel bad, if not worse, about my dance. So what is this critical voice that we all have? And all of the dancers, no matter what level, end up experiencing it. And I think it comes up in different ways, in different degrees. For some people, it's a little easier than others. But this phenomenon of just going down a list of things that you're constantly fretting over when you're dancing, that's actually quite common. Most of the stuff that I've tried in terms of managing my critical voice has not worked over the years. I've tried all sorts of meditations and visualizations and affirmations, and none of that stuff really works. But the stuff that does work ends up being some very simple, practical actions that anyone can do. So I will share those so you can try them if you are one of those many, many dancers who struggles with self-criticism. The kind of self-criticism that Tango brings up, I think, comes from this feeling that we really want to be good at it, right? Like we really want to strive for excellence. And we care so much about it. And when we care about something very deeply, that's when the criticism is the highest, because the level of excellence that we apply to our own efforts and the standards that we end up sort of setting up for ourselves are so much higher than anybody else would say. And so there is this desire to get good at it as fast as possible because it's unacceptable to be anything less. And so there's this anxiety to try to get there as soon as possible so that, that we measure up to the excellence that we see in our mind, that we admire in other dancers. So it's very unsettling, right? It's very unsettling to see yourself be anything less than what you aspire to be. So the origin of this self-criticism is actually a good place, right? We could say, yes, of course, we want to get better. We want to work on our technique. We want to integrate the lessons that we're receiving from our teachers. But this obstacle that we internally run up against is some sort of a belief and conviction that we're not actually getting better, that we're not doing it right, that it's not the way it's supposed to be. The best example of this in action I actually witnessed from a child years ago when I was teaching a little art camp at a museum in Dallas, Texas. And I had a group of kids, and most of them were anywhere between 7 to 10 years old. And there was this boy who was probably no older than 7. And he was standing in front of a painting and drawing it. And of all the children in that group, his was the best. And I was like, wow, this kid is special. He was seeing things in a much more vivid way and a much more artistic way than the other children. And it was very admirable from my perspective. But as I came up to him, I heard him say to himself over and over again out loud, "This sucks. This is terrible. This is terrible. I hate this." And he just kept repeating these kinds of phrases to himself. And it really stunned me because I realized that in a way, we all have a version of that we do as kids. And hopefully, for some of us, for as many of us as possible, we have some support around us to help us feel better about it ourselves over time. But, these kinds of patterns of negative beliefs about ourselves, they set in quite early. So everyone ends up having a version of this as they grow up. And as adults, when we enter Tango, whatever unsettled business we have around this particular area, that will flare up and that will come up. And the self criticism can get really traumatic in a lot of ways and can stunt a lot of people's growth. You might actually be a really good dancer, objectively speaking, and other people might even give you compliments and aspire to be like you and admire your movement, but you don't believe it. You don't believe that that's possible because your reference point is someone up there, very far away on the horizon who's achieved a much more, I guess, evolved state of tango that you have not yet achieved. So it's a constantly receding horizon that will never actually materialize. You'll always be looking further ahead. But at some point, it's important for us to begin to look at ourselves and understand where we are in relation to the people that we aspire to be like, but also to the people that aspire to be like us. That there is something therapeutic and necessary about us actually seeing our strengths, understanding what we have to offer, that it's not constantly all bad. We actually have to acknowledge where we have wins, where we progressed. Now, this critical voice is a part of us. It comes from all of the limiting beliefs and negative thoughts that we might have trained ourselves to think over the years. And so we're primed to feel those emotions and have a lot of fear around them being true, right? We're afraid that we're not going to be perfect. We're not going to meet a certain standard. But fighting it or repressing it or trying to escape or trying to overcome it is not going to work either. It's kind of a conundrum because you can't please it. You can't trust it because the more you follow it, the more imperfections and critical things it's going to give you. But you also can't shut it down and you can't repress it. It's always going to find a way to come up in the most unexpected situation, whether it comes from a comment somebody says about your dance that makes you feel really bad about yourself and makes you think that you don't measure up in certain ways, or it's some other peripheral situation that might trigger that. We're not really in control of it. It can come up in so many different ways. I definitely have been the victim of so many situations where nothing bad is happening, but my own mind creates some sort of a urgent, dramatic situation that makes me feel terrible and I have to leave and I feel bad about myself. And looking back, it's like, oh, that was me. I really did that. I created that. But in the moment, it really felt like there was some truth that I was realizing about how bad I am. And that's the trap that we a lot of times get into. So, how do we actually deal with it? And honestly, the trick always has to do with strategies to redirect your focus. You cannot beat your self critical voice inside, but you can redirect your own focus. You can choose what you're going to listen to. And it's as literal as that. That's probably the most powerful thing you can do in the moment. And I recently learned about a study that was done a while back where they had kids come into a room and there was a cookie on a plate. And I don't remember the exact parameters of the study, but the situation was that the kid had to sit and wait to eat the cookie a certain amount of time. But if he waited longer, then he would get more cookies or she. So the study was looking at what the kids were going to do and how many of them would settle for immediate gratification and how many of them would, you know, survive the wait and choose that path. And the observation that stood out to me was that the kids who were able to last and wait for a bigger reward, that they could get more cookies, the kids who were able to do that, what they did is they distracted themselves. They sang songs, they did things creatively, they made up things, they talked to themselves, they distracted themselves. So that's actually a very intuitive way that we all know how to do to redirect our minds is you distract yourself. Now, what does distracting yourself mean on the dance floor? So going back to this listener's message about the Rolodex of problems that's going through your mind when you're dancing. How do you distract yourself away from that? The obvious and the most ready answer always is going to be the music. If you can consciously focus your attention on the music that you're hearing and you tune into specific aspects of it. Sometimes the best way I imagine this is I imagine that I am Fred Astaire. If you've ever seen Fred Astaire dance, he basically becomes the music. And if you've never seen Fred Astaire dance, I have a link for you in the show notes. Please do yourself a favor and watch him. And the way he dances is he becomes the music. So I imagine that I have to become the music in that moment. In that moment when I'm completely imperfect, all of this stuff is still wrong. But in that moment, I have to be the music. So you tune in to your partner's musicality, you tune into the qualities of the sound, you focus maybe on a particular instrument, or you listen to the vocals, or you really feel the beat. Whatever quality of sound pleases you to focus on, that's what you focus on. And I tell you, it's such an amazing redirect when you are experiencing that kind of negative mindset starting to set in. It's so powerful that it feels unreal. It feels every time that I do it, I don't believe it's going to work. And at the moment that you try it, your mind is going to be like, no, it's not even going to work. You're going to still, you're still imperfect. But if you really commit and choose to distract yourself and give your mind something else to do, most of the time, I have not had an experience when it didn't work. You'll find yourself in a different space. And other people might actually like your dancing more, which is really frustrating. And it's a huge paradox. I don't understand how that can be. But it's when we are not thinking, when we are more in the music, when we're not so concerned with perfection, is when we a lot of times do our best dancing. And if not our best dancing, then the dancing that other people enjoy most. And I had an experience like this recently with my own process because I was recording a video of myself dancing to a specific song. And afterwards, both me and my partner watched the video and we hated it. We both were like, oh, this is terrible. This is wrong and that's wrong. And we need to do it again. So we do it again and we like the second version. So I'm pleased, she's pleased. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, I did it. I did it. I was proactive. I, observed what I needed to do and I followed through. So then I was editing both videos and my husband happened to see both of them and he really liked the first version. He did not like the second version that I thought was better. And man, that kind of hurt because in my mind, I thought, wait a minute, but I actually approached this with all this care and thought. And I was under impression that I was a lot more thoughtful with the music. And I brought a level of maturity that wasn't there the first time. Like I had applied all of this thought to it and I felt really good. And here's another person telling me that actually the other one was more compelling. And that's the word he used. It was more compelling. So again, that's going to always be part of the conversation for us, which brings me to a long-term strategy of how to work with your own critical voice and how to put it to work, let's say. Now, I know the thought of seeing yourself dance on video might be horrifying. And I understand that it's difficult. However, this is really the key to long-term success when it comes to developing a working relationship with your critical voice. Because watching videos of yourself actually takes out the sting over time of that feeling of like, oh, it's not what I think it should be. When you first see a video of yourself, a lot of times the sensation that you feel in your mind, like as you're watching yourself, is like, oh my God, that's it. I was feeling all of this expression. I thought my movements were so big and opulent and, I'm feeling so much, but then you watch it and you're like, what? There's barely anything there. So there's this discord between what you imagined you were doing and what actually was happening. Now, when you're inside the experience, you might have a lot of critical, negative self-talk going on, and you're focusing a lot on being perfect and you're working on your technique, perhaps. But unless you see it from the outside, you're kind of guessing, you're approximating. The true test, whether something looks the way you want it to look, is going to be seeing it on video. And sure, most of the people that I talk to about this experience of seeing yourself dance for the first time, most people don't like it. Most people cringe a little bit or a lot. There's always a feeling that there's so much lacking in the dance. But the more you start doing it as a practice, not like you do it once a year, but you actually do it maybe once a month, or if you want to do it once a week, even better. And the key, if you do it as part of your practice, is don't watch it the same day, but watch it a few days later, maybe even a week later. I guarantee you will always like it better after some time has passed. That's happened many times that I've hated my videos when I first make them, and then after some time, they actually look okay. So at first, when you start doing it, of course, you're going to be very judgmental. It's going to be right in your face. It's not going to look the way you want. And it does sort of put you through all of the emotion that has been stored there, like the things that you've been afraid to find out about yourself when you're like thinking about it. But you know what? Now it's right there. There's nowhere else. There's not like a beyond this, right? This is it. This is the scariest it's going to be. And this is the worst it's going to look. Like the first video that you make of yourself is literally the worst video that you'll ever make of yourself because it's the first one. It can't be any good. You know, it's the first time you see yourself. Of course, it's not going to be perfect. We think that by the time that we look at ourselves, we're supposed to have it all figured out on some level, I think. But honestly, watching videos of yourself dance should be part of the learning process from the beginning. And it would be so helpful because number one, it takes the sting out of seeing yourself on camera. But secondly, the other benefit of it when you do it consistently is that you start seeing certain patterns and you can compare. You can look at yourself from a month ago or a year ago. You can see if you're actually making progress in the things that you need to be making progress. So, a very common problem that we all work on constantly is the head forward. Everyone struggles with it, including me. And so you might have a total belief that your head is completely straight and you don't have any posture issues. But then you see yourself on video and you realize you were wrong. So now you can try the next time you're dancing, you try to focus it on in a certain way, you try different exercises, visualizations, you do I don't know, any number of things, and then you make a video of yourself again and you see whether it worked or not. It gives you that kind of feedback. So you actually can take that self criticism and before it gets all pent up, you actually channel it. Because when channeled, remember, the self criticism is coming from a good place. It's coming from a place of you want to get better. And you're just coming up against this belief that you're not getting better or you don't deserve to get better or you don't have the ability to get better or whatever. But as you see it on the video over time and you see yourself getting better, you know, your mind starts to recondition and you start realizing, oh, I'm getting better. It's not a matter of whether I'm going to get better or not. It's a matter of what do I want to work on next? And then I get better at that. And then I choose something else to work on and I continue getting better. It's much more of a creative journey rather than this sort of quest to prove yourself worthy of something. Now, if you've made videos of yourself already, you're in the practice of that, but you just don't know what you need to work on, how to look at your posture, what the issues really are in your embrace. This is something that I help with inside my program. I'm So Tango School Online, and I offer opportunities for video critique. So, as a member of the program, once a month, you can send in a video for critique, and I will actually draw on the video and talk you through the different alignments and any sort of details that you need to work out and give you some specific exercises to do or specific tools to work with to correct those issues. So if that sounds helpful, check out the link to I'm So Tango School Online in the show notes and let me know if you have any questions. Now, the final tip I want to leave you with, the one that's actually probably the easiest and maybe is the most powerful because it is so accessible to all of us. And that is write it down. Write it down. The negative self talk that we have running like a broken record in our minds, it's like pent up energy. And if you write it down, there's this magical thing that happens where suddenly it's out. It's out of your mind. You can look at it, you can read it, you can see it. A lot of times when you read it, it sounds crazy and kind of silly. And that itself is medicine. But typically, we don't think to write it down. And I've felt this way before. I've had this fear that if I write it down, I make it real, that somehow not giving it any opportunity to express itself, not shining any light on it, will prevent it from happening. But it's actually kind of the opposite, that when we really feel a lot of self-criticism and a lot of self-hate and a lot of negative self-talk, whatever it is about, it's very helpful to write down exactly what it is in the words that we're thinking them in. And you might even do this, write it down and then tear it up and burn it and throw it away. Like, you don't have to keep it. But I have found that as an ongoing support can help mitigate a lot of the impact from the negative self-talk that can overwhelm you out of nowhere, whether it's at the milonga or in class when you're working with somebody and you have a difficult time feeling confident. Like, those are the strategies that can be helpful. Writing it down, focusing on something else, redirecting your mind, and then long term committing to assessing your dance the way an artist would. A lot of times I think about my experience in art school as an undergrad. We used to have these 3-hour long critiques where people would bring in a painting and then we would talk about it for hours. It was my very favorite thing to do. I just loved doing it because it gave an expression, a vocal articulation to feelings and things that are very not tactile, ephemeral. And I think that contributed tremendously to my growth as an artist at the time. So when we choose to look at ourselves the way I was doing in Critique, where we put it on a wall and we look at it and we observe it, it's a very important process that will help you to get better over time. When you need that feeling of that you're progressing, that you're actually working towards something, it's so much easier to get that when you have a consistent practice of actually looking at your dance and making your own opinions about it, not relying on other people necessarily to give you your confidence to tell you that you're doing it right, but over time to develop your own appreciation of your dance. The degree to which we can criticize ourselves, we have the potential for the same degree in the opposite direction of celebrating and acknowledging our abilities and our progress. It's just a matter of seeing this as a creative process that is part of your daily practice of being an artist, someone who is constantly pushing further in their development. And you are willing to expose yourself to those critiques inside yourself, to the negative self-talk, to the emotions, because you understand that they're just part of the process. It's never going to go away. It's always going to be there. And I typically will tell people that at this point in my dance career, that voice has never left me. It's never gone away. It was up bright and early and very much vocal right at the beginning of me sitting down to record this episode, because I felt extremely unprepared, or not as prepared as I should be for this recording. So the critical voice is always there and ready to put in its 2 cents. But the difference between where I was maybe at the beginning of my journey when I first started Tango in 2009 to where I'm now is that I've just had more time with it. I've had more and more experience with it, that it's sort of desensitized me to the blow. It's kind of like breakups. When you first fall in love and you have a breakup, that first breakup is like, you don't even know how you're going to survive. It feels so dramatic. But then, you date a bit and you go through it a few times, and each time it's a little bit like, okay, it's not so dramatic. So I feel like with the negative self talk and that critical voice inside of us, when we first feel it come on in tango and we encounter the intensity with which it can come out at us, it derails us and it feels like, oh my God, I can't handle it. This is so much, right? It's overwhelming. It's hard to deal with. But over time, it just becomes less and less impactful, let's just say. Now, I'm curious if you've had experience with negative self talk and the critical voice inside you when it comes to learning tango and dancing tango. How did you deal with it? What have you learned along your path, and what tools have you gained that might help someone else to deal with similar issues? Pop your responses into the comments or do send me a private message on Instagram at I'm So Tango. And of course, if you haven't done so already, I invite you to join my private Facebook group where I go live every Friday and you get to participate in these discussions with me. I will see you next Tuesday. Don't forget my interview with Scott Bodie. Until then, ciao.